Alright, it's time for the actual build portion of this video series. I think it'll only be 2 parts. I can't imagine what I would do in a 3rd part, but we'll see how it goes. Today though, we're just going to be doing the actual build, and I'll just put this aside for now, and I'll show you what this huge box, well, huge for what I imagine is inside. I'll show you what we got in here. Alright, I'm going to do my best to keep the camera focused, but this is the InWin case that we got on Amazon. Awesome. InWin, I've had very good experiences with InWin as a computer case brand. They make a lot of very cool stuff, and I'll add in a screenshot of my test bench. Here's the InWin test bench I've been using. So for whatever reason, my camera decided to shut itself off. Battery was full, SD card had plenty of space, but that's Nikon for you. Anyways, the scene here is going to cut to the case, or rather the internals of the case. It's probably for the best that the camera decided to kaput on us, because I struggled to take the side panels of this case off for like 9 or 10 minutes, so that stuff was probably going to get cut out anyways, but yeah. Sorry about that, camera just decided to stop recording, but got the power cord here. It's actually a pretty decent one. Got some little plastic feet that will go onto the bottom of the, once the side panel is back on, it will attach onto the bottom so that this fan can draw in some actual air and it won't just be sitting flush. This case has 2 orientations though. You can sit it so it's flat like this, or you can put the feet on the bottom here and stand it up. Now I'm already seeing something I'm not a fan of, and let me just flip this around here. Now the whole reason, let's try to zoom in a bit. The whole reason I went with this case for like $140 or whatever amount it cost was that it came with this 300 watt power supply. However, this is the EPS connector for the CPU. It's got, I don't know how clear this will show up, but it's got there's nothing to it. It's like the wimpiest power connector I've ever seen. This case seems like it would be made for like a Core 2 Duo, where the old motherboards like this. See how it has a single 12 volt EPS connector for the CPU right there? That almost seems like what this one is made for, although they just daisy chained another one on here. I feel like this is going to get hot once we start doing anything with the CPU. I would definitely not do any messing around with the turbo limits with this thing. All the cables are very, very thin and frail feeling. It's definitely an older case. Although it does have the USB 3 connector. Look at that camera work. We're going to start with a dry fit, which means I'm just going to place the motherboard in here. We're going to run it with these spindly power supply cables. It says it's a 300 watt power supply, although it's made by Powerman. It's got 240 watts on 12 volt rail. Let's try it out. When I was running Cinebench previously, I believe the CPU package power got up to 85 watts when it was hitting the turbo limits. Let's go try it out. Okay, the super janky test bench is set up. Got the InWin case. We got the power supply with the nice spindly cables. Yep, that's 4 cables total to power 11900H. Bad feeling. 24 pin is plugged in, HDMI is in the back. I didn't plug it in yet because I wasn't sure if this power supply just turns the system on when it detects power. God, this back bracket is very bendy. Alright, it didn't turn on, so let's just short the pins here. Where are they? There. It's on. Let's see if we get a quick signal here. That beautiful RAM is already lit up. Oh. Okay. Looking good. Let's run Cinebench and see what happens. Alrighty, I've got one of these guys on hand, one of those temperature guns. Gives you the temp on the back display here. I'm just going to keep tabs on that CPU power cable. Alright, let's open Cinebench. They usually have hardware info open on the side here. CPU is nice and cool, sitting at under 20 degrees, it looks like on all cores, or very close to 20 degrees. Let's start Cinebench, and I'll decide if I want to stop it midway through here. Okay, for the first little run here, it's only been a couple minutes, sorry, 1 minute. It seems to be fine so far. Okay, so I've done quite a bit of messing around, just making sure that that CPU connector is enough to run our i9 here. I've got Cinebench open here. I'm just going to do one last multi-core run and show you how the cores are set to boost. So if you look here, they're all sitting just on idle around 1.6, 1.7-ish. I'm going to hit start on the multi-core. Let me bring back hardware info. So you can see they boost up to 4.7, they go to 4.09, and then in about a couple more seconds they'll drop to 3.5. It's probably about a 10-second boost. Oh, they're staying at 4.1 now. Okay, they just dropped. If I look down, it looks like one core hit 81 degrees here. So perhaps it's set to turbo at 4.1 until it hits 80 degrees. That would make sense, perhaps. I wonder if we put a more robust fan, if that would keep it boosting longer. I'm going to try it again. Okay, they're all cores at 4. Oh, nope, it's already down. Hold on a second, let's do it again. Cores are all under 30 degrees. Again. Cores are at 4.09. It's boosting. One core hit 80 degrees. Oh, they just went down to 3.5. Okay. So, astonishingly, even though we're running a laptop CPU, the all-core will still drop to, it looks like, 3.5 gigahertz. and that seems to be running at a stable, yep, seems to be stable now. Okay, so after running those tests, I ran Cinebench a multitude of times just to get some concrete data. The CPU power connector, oh, that chair squeak. The CPU power connector does just fine. It doesn't get hot, and the CPU will boost to 4.1 gigahertz all-core when I'm running Cinebench multi-core. And I'm not sure if it's temperature-based, but it seems that once any of the cores gets to 80 degrees or higher, that's when it will downclock to 3.5. So I went back and did some more testing with Intel burn test this time to try and get some higher temperatures. I saw upwards of 95 degrees on a couple of the cores, I think, this time. So it doesn't downclock when it hits 80 degrees. That just was a coincidence I happened to see with Cinebench. And in the BIOS, you can set your own power limits. So if you wanted it to boost to 100 watts for X amount of seconds, you can do that. What I was experiencing is just the power limits and temperatures that they had set. So you can kind of configure it however you'd like. In my case, I'm not going to mess with it just because of that underpowered 20 gauge CPU power connector. But just correcting myself a bit here. And you can see in the screenshot, those are the current power limits that's set. It should be perfect for what I want to do with it, just for burning DVDs and camera footage, doing some work in Premiere. Should be pretty good. Let's get back to the build. Sorry, did I say I was going to get to the build finally? Oh no, I meant to say I'm going to go and screen record myself looking up some more information about the power supply. Okay, so I just had to do a little bit more research for my own sake, and it's regarding the cables that are used on the power supply. Mainly the one that I was worried about, which is the 12 volt EPS CPU power cable. I did a little bit of searching and found this article on Tom's Hardware, and after looking at the cable myself, I realized that it was 20 gauge, and their opinion on 20 gauge is not that enthusiastic. So pretty much to summarize this little paragraph here, they pretty much recommend there isn't really a case where you'd want to use 20 gauge just due to the fact that it is capable of carrying power, but the whole reason why it's not really used in as many cases as you'd think is because it does heat up, and that's the whole reason that I was not fond of it, and it looks like other people are not as well. So if you were going to get another power supply for this case, or a TFX power supply in general, I would go for something that's a little bit more higher rated. So even though they are stupidly expensive for only 300 watts, I would definitely recommend something like this Silverstone one here. I'm going to use the Powerman power supply that came with the case, just because I can't really be bothered at this point to swap out the power supply for something that I may or may not be using a whole ton. So we're sticking with it, sticking with the original. But yeah, if you're going to be using this as like a cool minimalistic desktop alternative, and you are intending on using a slim form factor case or the one that I chose to use, I would definitely go with a better power supply. All right, so that was a lot of testing. A bit of a disclaimer, I am more of a hardware-oriented computer builder. I'm much less familiar with things in the BIOS such as power limits and overclocking. I just do more hardware stuff mostly. So a lot of those benchmarks and stuff was for my own learning, and I thought I would just record it and give you the option to skip ahead if you like. Let's get into the next, oh, there goes my Windex. Let's get into the next part of this video, and I think we're going to start with installing, we're going to install the floppy drive media reader and the Blu-ray drive in here. So at the front of the case you have your dual audio inputs, your USB 3 and USB 2, gives you 2 of each. Around the back we have where your power supply at the bottom there is. You've got 4 slots. That's where you put your low profile adapters such as a Wi-Fi card or a low profile graphics card. And that's pretty much it. The front of the case looks like it's made for installing different drives. It appears that there's some sort of, okay, this comes out completely. Alright, so I guess we can pop these plastic slots out of the front here, and we can make room for our CD-ROM and our floppy drive ROM, our floppy drive that's going to be used for that SD card reader. Okay, so we're going to start with the Sabrent internal memory card reader. That's pretty much just what it's called. Alrighty, so here it is. Comes with a few screws. We'll see if we need those. It's been a little while since I used one of these things. It's very basic though. You don't really need instructions. I don't think it even comes with instructions. On the back it comes with this USB 2 interface. So you can plug the header in. Camera's not really showing it that nicely, but the header for this can just be plugged into a generic USB 2 header on the board. It comes in some weird plasticky stuff. I'm just going to take that off right now. Alright, the plastic wrapping is off. Let's see if we can zoom in on the interfaces they give us on this thing. So we've got a USB 2 here, micro SD. There's a couple things I'm not familiar with. You get your normal sized SD slot right here, so that's what I'm going to be using for the footage that's currently recording off this camera. It uses a normal sized SD card. Looks like you get a couple other things. An XD port and a CFMD port. I'll have to look those up later. It's these two on this side. But regardless, lots of good connectivity options that are really not included on any cases these days. Normally now, if I went to the computer store and bought a brand new case, it would pretty much have probably a couple USB 3.1 ports, something of that sort, and a Type-C port most likely. You never really get the connectivity like this anymore. Now let's see how this installs in here. I'm curious if it has to be fastened into this first. Looks like it. Okay, yes. Okay, looks like it lines up with some screw holes and fastens in like this. So I'm going to screw that in now, and then we'll go on to the Blu-ray slot. Okay, so it's fastened in here. There is 2 other screw holes that I can see them through a little hole in the side here. There are 2 more screw holes to fasten it down a bit more, but they're inaccessible to get a screwdriver in there, so it's got the 2 screws holding it on the side. It's firmly in there, so yeah, let's get the Blu-ray drive out. Okay, here's the LG Blu-ray burner. nice. A generic looking CD-ROM. Now I can finally put my Blu-ray movies and things like that onto a NAS, home NAS server, and if I wanted to, I can watch them on my phone or something like that. So it looks like this. Oh, there we go. It's a bit more snug. I imagine it will stick out the same amount as the floppy drive SD reader. Yep. As you can see on the side here, there's the two holes where I can fasten it in. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright, we've got our two media readers installed into the front here. So let's add this to the front of the case and see how it looks. Now these yellow tabs on the side, I'm just going to make sure that they're in the open position. It looks like this is locked, this is open, in order to get it back into the case. Looks like that's open as well. Okay, this just came off, so that makes it a bit easier. Okay. Oh, that looks awesome. So that's the front, and I think we can just clip this on here now. So the front module is on. I think that looks quite nice. Got a ton of connectivity on the front here. It's a perfect little multimedia PC once everything's installed. In terms of what we have to plug into our motherboard, we have the USB 2 cable that comes from the SD reader, as well as the other USB 2 cable that comes from the front USB 2 ports. And I believe this motherboard should have enough. Yep. So on the bottom of the board, let's see if I can get a decent look here. There's two USB 2 headers. There's one right here, another one right there. And there's that USB 3 header right there. One more thing. This isn't really a big problem, but I've got the Gen 4 SSD here that we were using on this motherboard. Now, I haven't noticed really that it gets specifically hot, but I know that this case is a little bit lacking for airflow, so I'm just going to slap a little heatsink on it. This was like a $10 heatsink from Amazon. It's pretty cool. I've used them before. Pretty much comes with a couple thermal pads. You can see them right in here. You pretty much put a thermal pad on each side of the SSD, and this little block here, there's one of the pads. You pretty much just slap it in there like so, put a pad on top of the SSD, and then fix this little top heatsink in there. Okay, so we have our SSD installed in this very cool little NVMe heatsink. It just adds a little bit of surface area to it to help disperse the heat a little bit better. So I'm just going to throw this on the board now, and then into the case it goes. There's the SSD installed. There we go, right there. Looks pretty nice. Let's put the RAM in. So the RAM that we're putting in here was the kit that I bought when we were making our little Amazon shopping list in the first video. It's the 2x16 gigs of Kingston Fury running at 3200. Now, I looked a bit more on different specs, and it looks like I think in the manual that I was provided for the board and in another AliExpress listing, it looks like they recommend 3200 as the highest speed for these boards. However, there's lots of settings in the BIOS to tweak things, so it's kind of up to you. Worst case scenario, if you use some, say, 3600 RAM, you can always downclock it to 32 if it has issues. But this should be perfect for what we're doing, so let's install it now. Here's the first stick. Okay, interesting. So I was just looking at the DIMM slots, and in small writing there's a little thing that says 1.2 volts. So I understand now why they probably recommended you to use 3200 speed RAM. A normal, like this kit right here, runs at 3200 and it requires 1.35 volts. So I'm sure it's fine. I guess we'll see just by trial and error, but let's load this in here. Not the most satisfying click I've ever heard. Okay, there we go. So now let's put this guy into the case. Got a lot of cables that we're going to have to get out of the way here. Let's see if we can fix that. That should be fine. So first we'll get the I/O shield that came, where did I put it? For the Ethernet port. You can see there's a little metal tab covering it, so let's just push that inwards so it will be able to sit on top of the port. There we go. Alright, now it should be good to go. So the I/O shield is in. I just realized that this case doesn't have normal motherboard standoffs, it just has holes. You can see there's one right there. The case came with a little kit right here. We've got, oh, looks like some little grippy feet if you wanted to put the case horizontal, as if you wanted to put a monitor on top. So we've got those for the side. And we've got just a little bag of screws here. Now, there's no motherboard standoffs, so I guess these holes directly in the case will be the standoffs. So let's just install the board right in. Perfect fit. If you've ever installed a power supply, you've probably seen these screws. It looks like these are going to be used to screw directly into the case to hold the motherboard in. Sweet, looks awesome. Now, something I was curious of before was how close this low profile cooler would get to the actual case. We'll see if we could actually swap this fan out, because it's a special skinny fan made for these SFF cases. If we have a little bit of wiggle room, an extra half a centimeter or so, we might be able to fit in a normal sized 120mm fan, and it might just give us a little bit a little bump up on our cooling performance there. But for the time being, let's start plugging everything in, because there's quite a bit here. Just going to route the CPU cable back and around. I was hoping to keep it away from the VRMs because I don't need any extra heat coming into contact with this CPU cable. Let's move this a bit over here. So let's plug it in here. Next we will do the 24-pin cable. Let's put that down here. Nice, nice. We're actually going to squish this under the CD-ROM, so it's just out of sight a little bit. A bit more space to work with. We will then go with, let's see, we'll start connecting up the SATA cables and things like that. We only need one actually for the Blu-ray drive since our NVMe SSD is already installed. I'm going to tuck this under like that. And let's see. This can hook up like there. So that's giving power to the DVD-ROM. We have an extra Molex and SATA cable power here, but we can just route that down there. We don't need it. Let's see what's next. We're going to next do a couple of these USB cables and the USB 3 cable. So these cables are going to be plugging in right at the bottom here, so I'm going to try and not block the fan for the power supply. I'm going to try and route them around and see what the best method for that would be. This case actually came with a speaker. It's just a little 4-pin, well, technically 2-pin because it's just 2 cables, but this board actually has a designated spot for a speaker, so just for the heck of it, we might as well plug that in. So I've got mostly everything plugged in here. I was going to plug in the front I/O, so like the power button, HDD, LED, that kind of stuff, reset switch. But there's no silk screening on the board anywhere that shows me the proper layout. So I'm just going to look up a quick diagram and add those in as well. Okay, I just spent quite a bit of time doing some horrible looking cable management, but everything's plugged in. Last step is just the SATA cable here for the DVD drive. So I'm just going to see where the best spot to plug it in would be. I'm just going to plug it into, let's see, SATA 1 here. We'll try and route it around down here a little bit. Stuff it in there. And then I'll just have it come over and plug in. Eesh, I don't make a lot of compact builds like this, and this is the reason why. I like having it perfectly cable managed in the end, and it's always a pain in the butt when everything is just cramped. One thing I did notice is that in terms of USB headers, it has 2 normal USB 2 headers and a USB 3 header. So if you do have this SD reader alongside the front USB 2, you fill up both of the USB 2 headers. So if you had a Wi-Fi card that could fit in here, that would go in one of these slots, you would be able to have your Wi-Fi, but usually Bluetooth would require one of those USB 2 headers for Bluetooth functionality, so that seems like it would be something that would be missed out on just because there's nowhere to connect it. Anyways, let's get the side panel back on. Alright, this was a pain in the butt when I was doing it earlier, but I think I was just being stupid before, so... Oh yeah, that is much nicer. And I can see visually, it might be hard to see on camera, but there's plenty of space between the grate and that CPU fan. So if need be, we can definitely put a more robust fan on top of there. That's a little bit thicker. But for now, let's just get the screws in and give it a shot, see how it does. Okay, it looks like a little server actually, now that it's set up here. So in my use case, I think I'm going to be using it like this, and upstairs I'm going to have a monitor sitting just on this front area here. We'll keep that grate open so that that fan can draw in fresh air. So it's all plugged in. I've got my USB dongle for my keyboard and mouse plugged into the Sabrent media bay here. There's the Blu-ray burner. So let's hit the power and see what happens. Nothing. You could see in the last clip that it didn't work. I unplugged a ton of stuff. Pretty much I just have like a couple USB cables and the main power cables, and I unplugged all the front I/O down there and trying to short it now. It just won't turn on, so I'm going to undo the screws that are holding the board into the case, and I guess I'll see if maybe there might be some contact that's preventing the power supply from booting up. We'll see. Okay, so as soon as I took out all the screws and propped the motherboard up on the side of the case here, so there's nothing holding it in right now. You can see there's the empty screw holes where they were screwed in. It started right up, so it seems like something on the back of the board is making contact and preventing the power supply from turning on, so time to look into that, and I'll see what I find. Okay, so just for the first attempt of trying to find a solution, I just put a little bit of electrical tape on each of those exposed screws, even though I've never heard of that really being an issue. Okay, take two. I just put a few screws in. I think I only left like one of them out, but we've got everything hooked up as it was before. We've got that electrical tape on the underside of that mounting bracket for the cooler. The fan cable is plugged in. The fan's not fastened, but we only want to see if it will start up, so we're just going to check for fan spin. The only cable I've got connected other than power is the power switch cable. So when we hit the power button down here, it should boot up, hopefully. Okay, no dice again. So you can see right now, let me try and get a good look. You can see how the back plate, or rather the I/O shield and the I/O back there, they're separated a little bit. So I'll show you firsthand. So I'm shorting the pins right now, and the fan should start up. Yep, there we go. Now you'll see why it took me a little while to find out the problem. I'm just going to hold it under here, move it towards the back plate and try to move it into place, the system turns off. So something to do with the back plate and making contact with something back there is causing the short. So I'm going to try and figure out what it is. Alright, I'm back. I'm going to try this. Perhaps I figured maybe there was some sort of connection happening with something where one of these tabs was coming into contact with a part of the back plate or something like that. So I put a strip of electrical tape. Let's see if I can get a better shot. You can see just along the edge there. So let's see if maybe this will prevent any shorts from occurring. Alright, the fan is on, power is plugged in. Let's try shorting it again, and we'll push it even further into the I/O shield just to see if that maybe does something. Still nothing. And once again we'll test if we move it a tiny bit away, and it starts up. Okay. I don't know. Let me try some other stuff. Boom, we're in Windows. And the funny thing is, the only electrical tape I really needed in the end was about 1 square centimeter. I probably should have found out what the actual problem was quite a long time ago, because in reality it was something that should have been pretty obvious. I got all the screws in, but I was not able to put one in because there was no hole for it to line up in. And it was this one right here. So all the other screw holes, like that one, that one, that one, they all have a standoff to screw into, but that one was a little bit too far down, so I left the screw out. Lo and behold, the standoff underneath was touching against some circuitry on the back of the board, and it just so happened that that small amount of movement when I was moving it towards the back plate and back. That's, I guess, when it was coming into contact with those components or the circuitry down there. So I just had to put a little black piece of electrical tape over that empty standoff down there, so it's not metal on PCB, and now we're good to go. Alright, so I can't remember where I left off previously. It's a little while later. The build is once again completed and running perfectly. I have the Noctua fan swapped out. That's installed right now, and that's in place of the slim fan that came with the cooler. This case has enough depth so that it's able to handle that beefier fan. In terms of cooling, it does quite a bit nicer job. It keeps temperatures below 80 degrees when running Cinebench R23. Now, one of the things that's just been bugging me is this right here. This is the HDD activity light. It's that little symbol of the cylinder right there. You can see that the power LED is working perfectly, but the light above it is not on. It's supposed to be an orange blinking light that signifies activity on the installed drive. So anytime there's activity on that SSD we have installed, it's supposed to be blinking orange, and for whatever reason I just cannot get it to work. Now, there is a chance that I might have shorted something during all of my troubleshooting regarding that motherboard standoff that kept shorting the system. Perhaps that caused an issue and now that's why it's not working, but yeah, I've reconnected and tried 1,000 different things. I did a brief install of Windows on a SSD and plugged it into the SATA because I figured maybe the HDD light was only for the SATA connections. Nothing with that. I tried moving the SSD down to the other one because there's this other SSD that's linked to the chipset. That did nothing either. So I've kind of run out of options to get that light to function. I don't know if you can hear it in the background. For some reason, you can see in Task Manager here all these disk removables that show up. Those are, you can see if you click on one, there's generic SD device, generic compact flash device, generic SMXD picture USB. So that is the Sabrent floppy drive bay here. So all of those ports show up as removable USB devices. So if I took, let me see, if I took this SD card and plugged it in there, see that it shows up right away. I can't remember if there is a special driver for this thing. I'll have to look on the Sabrent website because nothing came in the box with it. But for some reason it kind of disconnects quite a bit, but you can still oh, okay, never mind, it just closed itself. There seems to be some sort of connectivity problem with that thing. Now the USB 2 header is plugged in for that thing right here. It's this silver cable. See, it's plugged in right there. It seems to be in there nicely, but perhaps there's some sort of driver problem that's causing the connection to drop in and out. You can hear it again, there it goes. Yeah, so the build is done. The build is completed. It took a little bit of work to get the DDR4 to run at the correct speed. The BIOS had a special menu for memory timings, and I had to do a little bit of digging around before I found the correct setting. But it does finally show up as 3200 there. I checked in hardware info and it's also running at the correct timings. It's running at a latency of 16, so that is what it's rated for. This fan is a little noisy, but I think it's just because I don't have any rubber bumpers on the bottom, so that's probably just the reason for that. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with it. I'll get one shot of it with the side panel on. Now, the build is pretty much done at this point. The only thing that I want to show now is the final product with the side panel on. Before I get a bit too ahead of myself here, I'll do a final list of all the components that were purchased for this build, and I'll tally up all the prices as well. So you can judge for yourself once you see the total if this is something that you'd actually want to pursue yourself, or if it's something better left to just have a video done about it. Up to you. So let's see how much I spent on this thing. So first we have the Erying custom motherboard with the Intel Core i9 11900H engineering sample. That rang in at $224.09. There was $50 shipping, but I guess that will vary depending on where you live. These prices are also all in Canadian dollars, so when I give the final total, you may need to convert it to your currency. Next we have the case, the InWin BL040 mATX desktop case, and this does have the 300 watt TFX power supply. That was $144.50. Next we have the Kingston 1TB NVMe SSD. That was $62.99. Next we have that aluminum heatsink that I bought for the SSD. That was just $10. Next we have the Kingston Fury DDR4. It was 32 gigabytes total. However, you could easily go with 16. That was $110. We have the Thermalright low profile CPU cooler. That was about $40. We have the Sabrent flash reader that we installed in that floppy bay. That was about $12. And lastly, we have the LG Blu-Ray DVD ROM. That was $80, and that is up to your own decision if you actually want to purchase something like that. A normal DVD ROM is much cheaper, so take that as you will. The grand total here, after calculating everything except that $50 shipping, was $683.41. But keep in mind that is not including the graphics card. We are just using the Intel integrated graphics. So here's the final product. This is in the horizontal direction. So this would be if I wanted to place a monitor just on top in that blank space here. I'm quite happy with it. This build took a ton of troubleshooting, and 99% of it is due to the case and the power supply, but the other, well, I'll say 50% was case and power supply, and then 50% was the custom made motherboard from eBay. So while it was a bit of a struggle, it was fun to have a build that wasn't just your generic gaming PC, because I've built quite a few of those things, and it's kind of just like building a puzzle after a while if everything works perfectly. So when everything's not given to you and not guaranteed to work, things you appreciate things when they work properly since it's not a given. I do think I will be doing a part 3 just for some generic benchmarks and everything now that it's all enclosed and good to go. So I think I might do a few comparison benchmarks with this i9 11900H engineering sample build. The computer here is a Ryzen 7 3700X, I believe. So these are both 8-core 16-thread builds. Maybe I'll do some comparisons with those. But yeah, stay tuned. I think I'll have some more interesting post-build content for this guy. I don't think its fate will be sealed to Blu-rays and video footage for the rest of its life just yet. From now on, I promise that the crackly microphone that I've been using with my camera setup will be put to rest permanently. I'll be using a very similar setup to what I'm currently speaking through. Sounds a lot clearer and should have no more problems in the future. Thanks.